As Lydia noted, our next guest to the stage is our invited keynote speaker, Elena Aguilar. And we inside of the New Tech Network organization have been deeply impacted by her work. She writes about coaching, and if you've read or experienced her work carefully, the subtext of that work is always about equity. And so our hope, my hope for this next time with Lady on the stage, our invitation to her was to challenge our thinking about equity. And so my hope is that you'll allow her to do that. Please welcome Elena Aguilar to the stage.
Good morning. I am so excited to be here this morning and to talk with you guys about the art of building equitable schools. Are there any artists here or art teachers, performing art teachers, music teachers? Great, thank you. So whether or not you are an artist or you have one in your family, you know that the process of creation is messy, and building equitable schools will also be messy. This morning, I want to share with you 7 strategies for building equitable schools, and I'm going to share some of my own stories and personal experiences of the messy parts of this process. So let's dive into the first strategy. Know your why. Why are you aspiring to build equitable schools? Your why is your foundation. There are going to be many moments in this work that are going to be challenging when you'll need to return to your why. It's where your strength, your courage, and your commitment come from. It's your anchor. I want to tell you a little bit about my why. Here's where my commitment to equity began. I was born in England. Neither of my parents are British. My father is Costa Rican, and my mother was Jewish, North American. And why I was born in England is a long story, but I was born there and I lived there until I was 10 years old. And here I was at 10 days old. Here is my 3rd grade class photo, and there I am. And you might notice that my school, my class, was really diverse. Now, in England, there's no separation between church and state. And so every morning, we came together for what was called assembly, and we prayed and sang Christian hymns. Now, my family was not Christian, and I was aware that the majority of my classmates were Hindu, Muslim, and Sikh. And yet every day we were instructed to bow our heads and pray. The message was clear. The majority of us did not belong or would have to change our core identities if we wanted to belong. When I started kindergarten, I also discovered that no one else spoke Spanish, which had been my first language, and actually that speaking anything other than English was not acceptable. And I refused to speak Spanish for 10 years. My personal experience of not belonging in school as a child contributed tremendously to my commitment to equity and to my definition of equity. Your why might come from your childhood or family, from your faith or your personal experiences, might come from experiences or learning as an adult. Know your why. It'll be your anchor. The second strategy is to define equity. One of the challenges I see in schools is that there's an absence of shared definitions for commonly used terms like equity. So I want to ask you to take just a moment and think for yourself about how you define equity. Perhaps just let a few words or phrases come to mind. I want to share my definition of equity with you. Equity means that every child gets whatever they need in order to be successful and to thrive in school every day. Every child, every day, regardless of race or ethnicity, regardless of socioeconomic status, regardless of languages spoken at home, regardless of gender or sexual orientation or religion or ability. Every child, every day, period. And when I say thrive, I mean academically as well as social emotionally. Because kids need literacy, and they need numeracy, and science, and PE, and the arts. And they need and they deserve to feel loved for and cared for, and that they belong to a community. They need to know that whomever they are is welcomed, accepted, valued, and embraced. Now, you may remember Maslow's hierarchy, his theory of what we need in order to survive. Maslow argued that physiological and safety needs are fundamental, that we can't do without sleep, water, shelter, food, which sounds about right to me. But there's a social neuroscientist named Matthew Lieberman who wrote this book. And his ideas really affected the way I think about equity. Because what he argued was that in order to survive, from the moment of birth, what we need is a caregiver who is committed to making sure that our needs are met. So he says food, water, and shelter are not the most basic needs for a baby. Being socially connected and cared for is. And so Lieberman says we should move that social down to the bottom of the pyramid. Social belonging might seem like a convenience that we can do without, but it's not, he says. So equity is about belonging. And in order to belong, we must be seen for who we are. We must be seen beyond our race, gender, class, sexual orientation, ethnicity, and so on, and also inclusive of those identity markers. This definition has nothing to do with color blindness. This is about being seen in our entirety. Equitable schools are those in which every child is seen and every child belongs. But I also want to be really clear about something. Equity is about outcomes. Our schools in this country are set up to be the equalizer opportunity. And it's not right that only 50% of students who are born into poverty will graduate from high school. And of those, only 10% will graduate from college. And it's not right that the reading scores for English language learners in third grade lag so far behind those of their white middle-class peers. But equity is about more than just outcomes. It is about belonging. So look for indicators of inequities in test scores and graduation rates, and also look in the less obvious places, like in the Christmas gift exchange, when the student who can't afford the $5 gift feels like she doesn't belong. And the Muslim child feels that in order for him to belong, he needs to celebrate Christmas. So that's the second strategy. Define equity. What does it mean for you in your classroom, in your schools? In order to create something, you need to have a vision for that. The third strategy, accept mistakes. You are going to make them. This was my first year teaching. And in that year, my university supervisor came to observe me, and she video recorded my class with this big old camcorder. And afterwards, we viewed it together and debriefed. And she gave me some feedback that I didn't notice. She said, "You're only calling on the male students." And I felt so ashamed because I had been that quiet girl in class that teachers ignored. And when I reflected, I realized that I didn't know about wait time, and I just wanted someone to answer the questions. I didn't know about strategies to ensure equitable participation. I was a new teacher, but unconsciously and inadvertently, I was affirming male voices and ideas and dominance. We may have positive intentions behind many of our mistakes. We all have blind spots. We all have knowledge gaps, which is why we need coaches and colleagues and other people we trust who will give us feedback. Now, around this form of inequity in the classroom, there's a lot of research in studies of secondary classrooms around who leads and dominates discussions, who volunteers to read more. It's male students. And what they found is that this starts in elementary school when teachers engage less frequently with female students. They ask them fewer questions. They offer them less feedback. And male students receive more time, energy, and attention than female students. Get comfortable making mistakes. You are going to mess up as you explore, surface, and interrupt inequities. You already have, and it's okay. It's your responsibility to look at those mistakes and to learn from them and to understand the ways in which you may have perpetuated inequities, but don't let the fear of making mistakes hold you back from looking at your practice. A growth mindset is essential on this journey to building equitable schools. Number 4, learn about implicit bias. Here are 2 students. On Tuesday, they are both goofy and off task, and on Wednesday, they both refuse to do their math assignment. Same behavior. Will they receive the same punishment? Researchers at Stanford studied this question of whether or not African American students would receive the same punishment for the same behavior as their white counterparts. And what they found was that the African American students would be punished more harshly. Why? Not because of overt racism, but because of implicit or unconscious bias. So I want to tell you how this experiment was conducted. The researchers showed all of these teachers the behavior records of a group of middle school students, and they said, imagine these are your kids. And these were students who had misbehaved twice for distracting students and defiance. Now, the researchers gave some of the behavior records the names of stereotypically African American students, such as Deshawn or Darnell. And they gave the other set of behavior records the names of stereotypically white students, such as Jake or Greg. That was the only difference in the study. And the teachers reviewed these behavior records, and then they responded to a series of questions, which included these. It should say, how irritated do you feel by the student? How severely do you think he should be disciplined? And would you call the student a troublemaker? And again, remember the only difference was the names of the students. And what did they find? Teachers were much more likely to increase the punishment for Darnell and Deshawn than they were for Greg or Jake. They were much more likely to want to suspend Darnell or Deshawn. This is scary. And by the way, there wasn't a difference in the response from the African American teachers. Implicit bias was just as strong in the eyes of Black teachers. Implicit bias is what leads to this. African American students are 3.5 times more likely to be suspended or expelled than their white counterparts, and that's according to a Department of Education report. My commitment to equity continues to be deeply personal to me. That's my child. And not only do I want him to be in class and learning, as opposed to in the office or on suspension, but I really want his teachers to know him for who he is. I want them to see his inquisitiveness, his questioning, his enthusiasm, and not just see him as a defiant black boy. I just want my child to be known for who he is. So learn about implicit bias. It affects not only how we respond to student behaviors, but to a number of decisions that we make in schools, including curriculum and hiring, promotions. And implicit bias is not just about race. We have bias around people we don't know, we don't understand. And so we can have implicit bias around class, gender, sexual orientation, around religion and ability. We all have implicit bias, and we can shed ourselves of a lot of it. And I do have some reading recommendations for you to get you started, perhaps, or help you continue on that journey. So we begin to build equitable schools by seeing each individual human being. And with that knowledge, building communities in which, when students dive into projects, they can learn with and from each other. And with that knowledge, designing the kind of learning opportunities so that students will be prepared for college and career. So seeing is a precursor to belonging. But seeing is harder than it sounds, because our vision, our ability to see each other, has been distorted. It has been distorted by implicit bias and by systemic oppression. And the way that we see some groups is particularly grotesque. This country was built upon some ideals which I am proud to uphold. And this country was built with the blood and the sweat of millions of African slaves. And until we contend with that history, we won't be able to make progress on our project to build equitable schools, because that history, it permeates our institutions. It's woven into our cultural fabric. It's in the air that we breathe. We must contend with that history. Perhaps, even as I've been talking, you've noticed that you've had some emotions come up. You will have emotions, and it's okay. As you become more aware of inequities and implicit bias, you will have emotions, and your feelings will change and shift, and you'll have so many of them. This was my son's first day of kindergarten. I wish we had used a real camera. This was the original iPhone camera. I wish we'd used a real camera because it's so grainy, but took him to school, dropped him off, and I had no idea on that day that the barrage of feelings that I was already experiencing working in schools was going to get even bigger and more intense as I left my own child in our local public school. I had to learn how to take care of myself, how to recognize and acknowledge and even embrace my emotions in this journey. You will have feelings as you move along this journey to build equitable schools, and other people are going to have them too. Our emotions are okay. In fact, they could actually be our allies on this journey to building equitable schools. The path to equity is paved with emotions. We have to start getting comfortable acknowledging them, and even talking to each other about our feelings. Now, when I first started teaching, I responded to implicit bias with quite a storm. Oh, we're on confront implicit bias. This is strategy number 6. When I first started teaching, one of my colleagues said this to me. Our district had made the decision to keep some bilingual classes. And she said, "This is America. They should just speak English." Now, my response to her was kind of problematic. It wouldn't really be appropriate for me to tell you exactly what I said in response, but it resembled this. And I had to live with the unintended consequences of that for years as I continued to work with her. Initially, when I heard and saw implicit bias, I responded with, I think, sort of a storm. And then I went through this phase that I think about as my jaw-dropping and silence phase, when I would hear things and I just didn't know what to say, and I would turn, walk away, and then spend days ruminating over what I wish I had said. And that wasn't productive either. It took me years to learn what to say, really. And so last October, a teacher said the same thing to me. She was frustrated that some of her students were talking to each other in Spanish as they were doing an experiment. And she said, "This is America. They should just speak English." And I had just started coaching this teacher. And calmly, without really thinking too much, I turned to her and I said this. "I'm really curious to understand where that belief came from. Would you be willing to talk with me about that?" And that conversation led her to a place of deep reflection, to really thinking about that belief. Once you learn about implicit bias, you're likely to start seeing it everywhere. Don't explode and don't stay silent. Learn how to respond in a way that might ultimately help kids. The last strategy is to look and listen. Now, I'm going to tell you a story about one of my most painful moments as a teacher. And I've actually never shared this anywhere. And so why not just share it with 1,000 strangers? But I really believe we're going to have to start talking about our missteps, the hard parts, the moments of embarrassment or shame. So one semester, after I'd been teaching for 12 years already, I was teaching an elective class called Study, Life, and Social Skills. And we had same-gender elective classes. And I had a group of 8th grade boys who were really challenging. I had never had classroom management problems. I had taught middle school for 12 years, never had them, and there they were. One day, my principal asked if I would meet with her and some of my students. And my principal, Larissa Adam, is one of the most amazing leaders I've ever known, and I trusted her completely. I went down to her office, and in her office were 3 African-American boys, the only 3 African-American 8th grade boys in that class. And Anthony said, "We feel like you single us out, like you treat us more harshly than you do other students who behave just as bad or worse. We feel like you single out the black boys." And my heart sank, and I had this moment of defensiveness as I started mentally listing all the reasons why they were wrong, and at the same time, I knew that they were right, that it was true. And I felt such an intense mixture of sadness and humility, and my response to them was, I am so sorry, and I'm so amazed by your courage and so grateful that you went to Miss Adam for support. And that was a turning point for me as a teacher. I started to reflect on my practice differently, to think about my own implicit bias differently, and to think about how we listen to students, how we create the safe spaces where students can be heard. It made me think about the role of the principal in a school in making sure that students could turn to another adult and be heard and supported and listened to. And I started listening to my own students in different ways. I started doing different projects and assignments with them so that I could hear about their experience more. Now, educators aren't alone in our interest, in our exploration about how to build a more equitable world. And I find great inspiration in how others in the world are dealing with social challenges. And so I want to tell you about a project that was done in Europe around how Europeans are responding to the refugee crisis. And I'm going to show you a 1-minute video about this project.
Six, five. Mit 6, 5.
Here's what that video makes me think about in our context. Perhaps it could be easier than we think to reduce our implicit bias, to see each other, to learn how to listen to each other. Maybe we can find new ways of seeing and listening to each other. Maybe building equitable schools could begin with something as simple as just looking at each other. And so, right now, we're going to practice the murmur of, oh my God, is she really suggesting this? I am, because I know it's going to feel awkward. I've done this with people before. And I think that you're up for a challenge. And so what I'm going to ask you to do first, I'm going to give you some directions, is first at your tables, quickly pair off. If you're at a table that has an odd number, then stand up and look around, make eye contact with someone. Turn your chairs and your body so you're facing each other. You'll be doing this for 1 minute. Find a partner. And in a minute, I'm going to set the timer. And let's be ready in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. So there'll be silence. I'll put on a timer slide, so we'll be sure I won't let you sit there for 4 minutes. And everybody ready? All right, make eye contact. All right. And go ahead and take a moment to debrief with each other. And let's come back together in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That's a really powerful activity to do with a leadership team or a partner teacher or really just about anybody. Here's the one big idea that I want to leave you with. We will build equitable schools by using compassion, curiosity, and creativity as our primary tools. And the good news about that is that we already have those tools. We are compassionate creatures, and we are curious. We've been that way since we were really little. And yes, we get freaked out by people whom we perceive as being different from us. And we are wired to care for each other. And we have tremendous capacity for creativity. And to work for equity is to live with this paradox that we're afraid of the unknown, we're afraid of people who are different from we are, and we take action in spite of our fear. I know that you are committed to seeing your students thrive. I know that you want to see your own loved ones, your own children thrive. And I know that you want to be seen for who you truly are. You want to belong. And with compassion, curiosity, and creativity, we will transform our schools. Thank you.